Shalom Chaverim, today Parashat Shoftim, and we're going to talk about Shoftim together with Enlightenment philosopher Montesquieu. So let's begin right away with a quote from probably his most known work, The Spirit of Law, and it goes like this. It is the business of the legislator to follow the spirit of the nation when it is not contrary to the principle of government. For we do nothing so well as when we act with freedom and follow the bent of our natural genius. Okay, and we're going to unpack it to understand what Montesquieu means here. So, need very little introduction. The Enlightenment French judge. He was a judge, historian, and philosopher. He was born in 1689, died in 1755. Now, he's probably the philosopher which is the most associated with the idea of the separation of branches in government, democracy, and the importance of checks and balances. And he's probably one of the most influential philosophers on the founding fathers. And in fact, it is said that he was cited by the founding fathers more than any other source other than the Bible. So very big influence. And enacting a rule over a nation in a just way is also exactly what the core of our Torah portion, Shoftim, is about. So the portion begins with a very, very famous, actually not just a famous verse, but 3 verses that are very famous. It goes like this: שופטים ושוטרים תיתן לך בכל שעריך, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך לשבטיך, ושפטו את העם משפט צדק. Okay? And it means you shall appoint magistrates and officials. So actually, Shoftim v'shotrim is judges and officers, okay? Judges and officers you put in all of your gates, and God give it to you and to your tribes, and they would judge the nation a just judgment. And it continues with לא תטה משפט, לא תכיר פנים ולא תיקח שוחד, כי השוחד יעוור עיני חכמים ויסלף דברי צדיקים, which means you will judge fairly, right? You will be impartial, right? You will not just judge in favor of someone you know, לא תכיר פנים, and you shall never ever take a bribe, because the bribe makes the eyes of the wise blind, and it distorts the speech of the righteous. It's really, really beautiful here. And then, of course, צדק צדק תרדוף למען תחיה וירשת את הארץ אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך. צדק צדק תרדוף means justice you shall pursue, so you would live and inherit the land that God is giving you. Now, these famous lines that I'm sure a lot of you know, justice you shall pursue, they teach us something that is rather profound. What they teach us is that it is not enough to have upon you a justice system. That justice system has to be just. And we all know how in our history, ancient history and recent history, some of the most monstrous deeds were done by societies that had a justice system, that had rules and regulations, that had legislatures and officers and judges, and still committed the most horrendous crimes. And it is known that former Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg had those words in her office, tzedek tzedek tirdof, to remind herself that it is not enough to just follow the law, but you should follow it in a just way. And in his book, The Spirit of Law, actually Montesquieu is talking about the same idea. And it is very interesting because he is the most known for the idea of the separation of branches, but actually he claimed that that idea was only one possible way to govern, and it was not for everyone. Basically, what Montesquieu said is that what matters is not the form of government. What matters is the spirit of the people. And I will give you another quote from the Spirit of Law. So he says, mankind are influenced by various causes, by the climate, by religion, by the laws, by the maxims of government, by precedents, morals, and costumes, when is formed a general spirit of nations. So this is how he defined the spirit, right? The spirit of nation. Later on he writes, when these manners and costumes are to be changed, it ought not to be done by laws. This would have too much the air of tyranny. It would be better to change them by introducing other manners and other costumes. Think about it. It's a fascinating idea. What Montesquieu is essentially saying here is that no system, no matter how sophisticated it may be and how many checks and balances would be in it, no such system would work for people if their spirit is not ready for it. If they themselves with their traits are not ready to absorb it. And he talks about it in length in the book. And in our tradition, we are very much the same. The Rambam in his Mishneh Torah, so basically his epic halachic corpus, basically in Ilchot Sanhedrin, so basically when he talks about judges, about Shoftim, right? Saying this, which is really, really beautiful and not less profound. So he says, בדין של שלושה, אף על פי שאין מדקדקים בהם בכל אלו הדברים, צריך שיהיה בכל אחד מהם 7 דברים, ואלו הן חוכמה וענווה ויראה ושנאת ממון ואהבת האמת ואהבת הבריות להן ובעלי שם טוב. I wish, I could convey how beautiful the Hebrew is here, but I will translate it. So basically what the Rambam's saying here, that when you appoint judges, right, it's not just enough to appoint the judges. They should have 7 traits that would make them worthy judges. And those 7 traits are wisdom, humility, the fear of God, a loathing of money, a love of truth. Must be person who is beloved by the people at large and must have good reputation. Look at that. All of these traits that the Rambam lists here are not things that you can learn in law school, are not things that you can force or anyone or write laws about. These are spiritual. Spirit comes from spirit, spiritual traits that people should possess. And in that, he is not different than Montesquieu and his idea. So, the Torah itself, this here in Mishneh Torah, after Rambam lists all of these 7 traits, he says, כתוב במפורש בתורה. Basically, what he's saying is that every one of these traits that a judge should have is, you can actually find in the Torah a verse that would prove it. And he goes through all the verses that prove it. But what does it mean? It means that those traits are not just for judges. It means that those traits eventually is what the spirit of this nation that is forming, the Israelites, should embody. And actually Montesquieu really, really proves what the Torah lays out for us so beautifully, that the Israelites, right, a nation of former slaves, in their spirits, they were not ready. They were not ready to receive this just system or this justice system. And no matter how care and protection they received from God, they kept rebelling over and over again. So much so that none of them got to actually enter the promised land. It would be their children or the generation that was born free that would then get to enter the promised land and enact that justice system. So the Torah really tells us what Montesquieu is saying. Their spirit was not ready. It doesn't matter how sophisticated the system is. And I think that it's a pity that Montesquieu is not more known for this idea that I think is very interesting. We can see even in our modern times where our Western civilization tried to force our democracy that we see judge on other nations that are not ready for it. In spirit, it fails again and again and again. So to conclude, I'd like to invite all of us, as we are, as you know, in Elul, we're approaching the times of reflection and of soul searching. And I want to give an intention then, rather than just focusing on our own spirits, let's try and focus on our collective spirit, and get it ready to maybe then enact upon ourselves a just justice system. Shabbat Shalom.